told ghost stories before, some based on legend, others individual experience. Most so-called ghosts appear at night, and rarely are they seen by more than one person. But the strange apparition in this story appeared in broad daylight and was seen not by one, but 3 people. Buying a home can be a trap for young players, with all kinds of pitfalls. Some you can guard against. Some, as one Australian family discovered, you can't. That family was the Middletons, Judy, Brian and their daughter Heather. They remember the day 20 years ago they found their dream home in Tasmania. But the ink on the contract had hardly dried before the Middletons' dream began inexplicably turning to a nightmare. As Judy wandered through the corridors of the old cottage that was to be her new home, she began to feel something was amiss.
It was ice cold. It just struck me as being ice cold. And then the dogs first stood up on end. I noticed that. And then this feeling left us.
Judy Middleton had her heart set on the house and shrugged off that feeling. She continued her investigations from the outside, but as she peered through a window into one of the deserted rooms,
and there was an elderly man leaning over an elderly lady in a rocking chair.
An elderly couple. He was wearing dungarees. She had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know whether it was a ghost or what it was. It was so real. It wasn't just an outline. It was a solid figure, 2 solid figures there. And they were very, very real. But I knew they weren't there when we had looked previously through the house only a few minutes before.
By now, Judy Middleton was very confused and a little alarmed. No one was living in that house. No owners, no tenants, no one.
The next day, we went back and had a look, and and I could see their faces at the window, this elderly man and elderly lady. They were looking out the lounge window. And I never said anything, and after that, I went off the house completely.
I think I started to get quite anxious about it, you know, and in the end I demanded, well, what's really wrong with it? It's not the, you know, and she said, well, actually, I think it's haunted.
Haunted by an elderly couple. A corridor that was inexplicably freezing on a warm afternoon. A presence that made the family dog's hackles rise in fear.
And when she's mentioned the coldness, it struck me that while I was signing the contract with the real estate agent, there was an intense cold in that lounge, and I couldn't, it was so profound, the cold, I couldn't explain it, you know.
The next weekend, Brian, Judy and young Heather Middleton set out again to visit the house. Brian was wavering, but still sceptical.
I tried to reassure Judy that she could be mistaken or imagined it, or, you know, maybe it's a trick of light or something. But she was very, very positive that she'd seen this.
As they approached the house, all 3 of them saw something unusual. There in the front of the garden was a man, apparently digging potatoes. A man wearing dungarees. A man Judy recognized immediately.
She was angry. She was saying, he's the man, he's the man. He's in the garden digging potatoes. He's the man I saw. He was clearly digging. He didn't turn his head. I remember that. He didn't turn his head, although I slowed down. I expected him to, because a lot of people who are working out front generally glance up, you know, if they see a car going by. And he was just digging, very intent on what he was doing.
Everyone was fairly horrified when they first saw the guy in the garden, for different reasons. My own reason was I was sort of horrified that somebody was taking off with our potatoes, because I already assumed the house was ours. Mum was fairly horrified because she recognised the fellow because she'd seen him previously. And Dad was fairly horrified because he likes vegetable gardens and had spent a lot of time working out where he was going to put one. And here was a vegetable garden full of potatoes he hadn't noticed previously.
Although Heather was only 7 years old at the time, even she remembered the front garden. Only days before, it was all lawn, with no sign of a vegetable patch.
And as we drove further along the road, there was a great discussion as to how to handle this. Dad's not a particularly confrontational person, so Mum and I were nagging him to actually get out of the vehicle and say something to this guy. And Dad was becoming anxious because he doesn't like confrontational situations at all.
But when the Middletons reached the house and the garden, there was no one there to confront. Not only that, no potatoes, no vegetable patch, nothing.
I don't believe in ghosts or fairies or flying saucers or any of those things. If it had just been a gentleman who'd been in our garden 1 minute with 2 sacks of potatoes and the next minute had gone, there'd be absolutely nothing unusual about that. Let's face it, he could have been taking them illegally and now had shot through. But I still can't explain how you could have got a large dug area piece of ground with potatoes in it and the next minute had it converted back to lawn. I still can't understand that.
Not surprisingly, the Middletons decided they could do without these ghostly tenants. And the house they thought would be their dream home. Surprisingly though, the real estate agent agreed to tear up the contract and cancel the sale. He also managed to shed some light on the mystery of this apparently haunted cottage.
He had been told that maybe that there was a man and a woman in the house and the old lady had been missing, and that the man, they were told, the man had been had probably killed her and buried her in the garden.
Since that point in time, we've probably only discussed it a half a dozen times. Very briefly, when somebody else comes out with a ghost story sort of thing, you say, well, yeah, well, we had a funny incident occur. But it sat so strangely with all of us that it was very difficult to know what to say. It's like being in a state of shock.
When strange things happen, we're often tempted to question our own sanity. Did we really see what we thought we saw? Hear what we thought we heard? Questions we've all asked at some time or another. And even when we've assured ourselves of the answer, doubts often linger.